just thought it was the worst call of the year. That's all.
We're not going to make promises, but I tell you this.
Yeah, I'm about to get wild. I know that. Let's get wild.
I don't answer anybody's question but yours. But you're an idiot. And really disloyal.
It is that time of year in Syracuse basketball where we get to ask how many games would this team won without Gerry McNamara?
Definitely not 10 effing games for damn sure.
Welcome to the Disloyal Idiots podcast here on the Fans for Sports Network. Christian Guzman alongside Andy Bregler, yet to be determined if Steve Haller will join us for this session of Disloyal Idiots. And it is a slightly important session that we need to get to today because of certain things that have happened. I thought we were just going to talk about Brian Blair and his excellent introduction press conference that he had for Syracuse. And then this afternoon happened. Again, we record on Sunday evenings.
Just absolute bombshell. And a lot happening over the last few days. For me, I think my favorite part about this was that I was watching Arsenal get absolutely obliterated in a game that they had no interest in trying to win. And then this news pops up on my phone, and the first reaction that I think a lot of us had was that the reporting was not valid. And then it turns out, nope, this is incredibly valid. It was just surprising who had it first, and we went from there. And so, I mean, if you somehow live under a rock and you don't know this and you're listening to this podcast, Gerry McNamara is the new head coach of Syracuse basketball.
Important also that it's unconfirmed, that it's not been fully official by the university, but multiple relevant national reporters have reported the news.
And yes, and including Pete Thamel, whose report we will dive into here a bit. And Thamel, for those who might not be as inside baseball as we are, Thamel appears to be the ESPN mouthpiece for the university. Thamel has gotten several breaking news in regard to Syracuse over the last couple of years. Those who remember, Thamel is in fact an alum, so there's some deep connections there between Thamel, Wild Hack, Syracuse in general. So if he has it, it's happened. For lack of a better word, that's the way it's been for the last 2 years. And so if Thamel has it, and Thamel's story on ESPN has quotes or statements, it's strongly likely that it is either being fed to him by the university or he has confirmed it among multiple university sources himself. So Thamel was not the first to have this news, but once Thamel had it, I think we all kind of went into, oh shit, this is actually happening. Steve, you were one of the first people that I texted about this. How you feeling, buddy?
And we move on. Okay.
Okay.
No, I think that
yeah.
encapsulates all of our feelings to at least the three of us to the news that Gerry McNamara will be the new head coach of Syracuse men's basketball.
It's a really odd situation. I know I said on, well, I don't know if it was on past pods because I've decided to be MIA the past couple of weeks because life is doing life things. One of them, I was just not able to literally get vertical. So that's always fun. That said, when this whole thing started, from the beginning, I said the last thing I want is for us to end up with McNamara. And that is not a knock on McNamara. And that is not a knock on, anything Gerry has done. I don't feel great about it. I know, Andy, you and I have talked about it a couple of times. If there's a very, very good chance this could work out amazingly and could be one of the best things that's, happened to the university. I don't know. But on paper and where I'm at now, my brain says I don't particularly like it.
Here's where I'm at with this. And I'm going to start off with a weird analogy, but follow me along with this. For video game players, a lot of people will have played Call of Duty at some point.
I played the original one, Christian.
Exactly. I mean, and Call of Duty is a very, very storied franchise that sold a lot of copies. Thing is also there's a competitive side to Call of Duty as well. Like there's a esports version of Call of Duty. They play on the same Call of Duty games. What's interesting about Call of Duty is that you see a lot of games that don't sell well for Call of Duty, but are make a good competitive format. And a lot of other Call of Duty games are the flip opposite, where it's not a great competitive game for Call of Duty, but it does really, really well with the casual market.
Mm-hmm.
And what Call of Duty usually does is caters its changes and its marketing towards the casual fan base and not people who are necessarily full into the game. And I feel like that's what you get here with this hire for Gerry McNamara. Now, the three of us are a lot more into the weeds of Syracuse athletics. You'll see a lot of people online a lot more into the weeds of Syracuse athletics.
Yeah.
We have to also recognize that we represent a minority voice. We're not
Oh yeah.
not as many people in Syracuse are so in depth into analyzing the athletics of Syracuse University.
I think I texted you guys after this all started to go down. I know Pregler. Oh, you know what, Andy? It might have been you and Held. That I had a ton of people texting me, as you can imagine, and anyone who was a ancillary college basketball fan, just kind of tunes in for the season, whatever, was extremely excited about the hire. And anybody who was a little inside baseball with college basketball or college athletics was very mixed to negative on the hire. Or I wouldn't say mixed to negative, because I'd say very similar to me, not initially excited about it in any capacity, if that makes sense.
And I think that explains the values that all three of us hold about the hire of Gerry McNamara. But you cannot discount the power that the casual fan base has of Syracuse basketball, because ironically, whether you like it or not, that's the market and demographic that makes up the majority of not just Syracuse fans, but athletics fans also.
Yeah.
And just in general, we're not just talking Syracuse, we're not just talking college, we're talking all of sports and all of athletics. So this is very much a hire that is going to excite that very large group of athletics fans. Who are the people that went to Syracuse basketball games this year? Hardcore Syracuse fans. The casual fans didn't show up to Syracuse basketball for the past 5 years. That's why attendance has been dropping. They didn't have a reason to go to Syracuse basketball games. They didn't have a reason to be invested in the program. This is very much a reason to get those people who haven't followed Syracuse basketball for the past few years back into the program.
But let me ask you one question, Christian. When McNamara ends up going, 12-12 in his first year and not making the ACE or the NCAAs again, not 12-12, but you get what I'm saying. Like when he inevitably ends up with a team that's relatively incoherent and doesn't make the tournament again, what happens next year?
Well, I mean, that's
because winning
that's the
basketball
rubble.
Games that's what brings people into the seats. And yeah, this will spark something for next year, but long term, unless we start winning again, the dome's going to be half empty all the time.
And I fully agree with you, but I think that immediate impact of getting excitement back into the program is something that I think was too juicy to ignore, especially with the reported failure to get some of the other big name targets out there. I think at that point, this is the best option that you could have gone for, especially with the reported denial of favored targets.
And I guess that's the thing is and again, this sounds really negative on McNamara, and I don't want it to. It's like it's not so much a discounting him, but like where we are as a program, that we landed here and that we're going for the flashy thing instead of splashing a little extra cash and going for and it's reports seem to allude to the fact that we tried to go elsewhere and that this is where we landed. And I don't know what you guys hit in the 5 minutes before I popped on, but it seems like this, like you just mentioned, this is the safe maneuver for where we ended up in the carousel. That said, there's probably some other names out there that still could have made a bit more of a difference from a basketball standpoint.
I think, I think that this is a great point. What Steve is referencing, again, going back to that Thamel report that we should treat as important. Thamel, as he is saying, Gerry McNamara will be the next head coach at Syracuse, also says that there's a commitment from Syracuse to be in the top third of NIL spending. What that exact number is not explicitly said. And then Matt Norlander of CBS, as of an hour ago, updated a coach tracking article where he talks about McNamara being hired, but also reports that Syracuse was trying to pry John Schertz, the St. Louis coach, out, who is also a Brooklyn native. There we go, Joe Schertz.
Josh Schertz.
Josh Schertz, geez, one of the J names. Prying Josh Schertz out of St. Louis, even after the first round win over Georgia that they had. It appears that according to Norlander, I'm just going to read this verbatim. Though that never came to be, the fact that Syracuse still looked at Schertz and other candidates falls in lines with what sources previously told me. McNamara winning out comes after weeks of debate amongst big money players at Syracuse who were split over whether or not to break from the Syracuse family Jim Boeheim coaching tree. McNamara is, of course, adored at Cuse, but some influential supporters of the program felt adamant that Syracuse needed to go in a new direction. Others favored keeping it in the family at least for one more try. McNamara was the obvious choice in that regard. I'm told Syracuse is hopeful it can raise more than $9 million in total NIL budgeting, with at least $4.5 million of that coming from revenue sharing. McNamara will have the support he needs to try and turn things around in Central New York. End quote. There's so much in there I want to get into, but as of kind of bouncing off of what Steve said, I don't think it has been lost on anyone that the moment Autry was fired, Jim Boeheim was first in line to go on the media show and say Gerry McNamara is a great coach and deserves a look at this job. I don't think that is not important when Jim Boeheim, even though he was calling games for the ACC tournament, still has an office up at Syracuse and is still an influential figure with many of the big-time donors related to this program. And so I think it becomes very obvious, to use another analogy that is not necessarily Syracuse focused, but one that I shared to both these guys and in the News Magician Slack channel. For those who are soccer fans, this is starting to feel aggressively like Manchester United after Ferguson, their legendary manager who led led the club to its biggest and greatest successes, led them to the championships, led them to European championships, is the reason Manchester United is Manchester United. Once he stepped down, he didn't leave. He was still around. And Manchester United is still, all these years later, digging itself out of the issue of the guy we are trying to replace is walking around and everybody that we hire is doing a best version of an imitation of him. And again, I don't think it's lost on a lot of fans here that they might love Gerry, but this is not the kind of move that the quote unquote blue blood programs make if their assistants aren't top of the line. See Mark Pope or John Shire at Kentucky and at Duke, respectively. Both of those coaches also, if the Syracuse 9 million figure is to be believed, both of those programs have double the operating revenue that Syracuse would be operating in a quote unquote big spend year. So all in all, this is going to be a really interesting split to watch as the seasons go through, if only because, Steve, like you're saying, it does feel as if the ones that have been caping hard for McNamara will be the first to treat him the harshest if there is a sign of struggle, while everybody else is going to kind of sit back and just very quietly go, yeah, this is what you can expect out of a coach who's in his second ever head coaching job, third season ever of head coaching, and made a massive jump from a mid-major to a ACC program trying to compete with some of the biggest spenders in the sport.
Yeah. And prior to this news, what I had said to just about everyone I talked to was, because Gerry would inevitably come up, and I had many discussions about it where I was all for, at some point, Gerry McNamara coaching Syracuse. I wanted it to be, the next time we're looking for a coach, somewhere down the road, bring the prodigal son back and like have him run the program, but like go blood yourself on a high mid major, or a low P4 team or something before trying to right the ship and potentially ruining your legacy here. And again, I sound and I feel like I'm doom and gloom and like hitting all the sour points, and maybe that's my task today. But it's just all the things that have been running through my head.
I mean, like, think of it from like another sporting perspective. Like if you go to hockey, Barry Trotz is an excellent coach, and unfortunately, his legacy is somewhat tarnished, at least based on recent memory, by the way he has run the Nashville Predators organization as their general manager. Right now, Adrian Autry obviously was a great player at Syracuse, but recently his memory is tarnished because of how it's gone at Syracuse as well as the head coach. And I agree with Steve. Gerry McNamara should have had the opportunity to become Syracuse's head coach at some point. It just comes sooner than I think we both would have liked, because as Steve said, I don't think 2 years of head coaching Siena is necessarily what prepares you to take on the head coaching role at Syracuse University. It's a big jump. It's a big reason why we like the other names that were rumored to be floating out there, like Josh Scherz, who, again, Syracuse reportedly was looking at, like Brian Hodgson, who has decided to join Providence instead. And if the reasons to join Providence are to be perceived to be true, and with Matt Norlander's reporting as well, you can see how the limited NIL budget that Syracuse currently has definitely didn't do them any favors. And it's why I think someone like Luke Murray would have definitely been a excellent choice, given his success with UConn as their assistant coach, mainly working on their offense. I think
the offense is one thing that I know.
Well,
Andy, where you?
What I was going to say about this is, like, X's and O's aside,
right?
The reporting around Murray has been that he can be incredibly selective because he is essentially next in line, in the Mike Hopkins sense of the word, if UConn ends up having an unexpected vacancy due to either a surprise retiring or an NBA promotion of Hurley. And so I think in his situation, he's probably, again, parallels to Syracuse with Hopkins here, much like when Hopkins was named coach in waiting. He got lots of offers, but decided to stay because the perfect job didn't come around. He didn't end up leaving for Washington until, one, there was a familial situation that kind of pushed him to look elsewhere. And two, it became apparent that Boeheim was never going to leave on any sort of predicted timeline. And so I think with Murray, prying him out of UConn was probably going to cost a lot of money. And Hodgson, as reported by Syracuse.com, is being given $10 million in NIL for his first season. And so if you're Syracuse right now, publicly, you have just stood up and said, we are committing to spend the most NIL that we've ever spent. And Providence, a Big East school that finished in the bottom half of the Big East, is standing up and saying, yeah, we can dole out more than Syracuse can. And that is probably a huge reason why Murray was probably never seriously considered. White Shirts, even though would be a massive increase for him, probably felt better off staying at St. Louis. The reports are that he is very interested in Michigan State should that come open with a Tom Izzo retirement in the coming years. I just think that the reality for Syracuse, Steve, kind of bringing everything, full circle here, Gerry was not the first choice. Gerry was probably not the second choice. I have heard rumors that Gerry was not the third or the fourth choice. But what I am pretty sure on, based off of the Thamel report, Gerry is expected to be making, I believe it's $14 million over 5 years. That is just under $3 million AAV, which is a slight raise over what we were paying Autry based off of the USA Today database for college coaches. That puts Syracuse in the top 50 of coaching salaries. It does not put them anywhere near the top 25, which is at around $4.5 million.
I was going to say, wasn't that about what Boeheim was making in like towards wherever because he kept turning down raises to keep up with the Joneses?
Exactly. And so I think it becomes very clear that whether or not we agree that Gerry is the best choice in a vacuum, we don't live in a vacuum.
No.
And the situation that Syracuse has presented itself with, McNamara might be the most cost-efficient option at maintaining a competitive NIL pool while ensuring that the salary does not necessarily jump above what Syracuse has historically paid their coaches in the basketball world. And that in itself is a Syracuse structural problem that Brian Blair will have to solve if Syracuse wants to be competitive long-term. But again, like just kind of looking at where things are now in March of 2026, I think Syracuse just kind of looked at the board and said, well, this is what we have. This is what we can get for it. I might not love the Wegmans brand Cheerios or whatever, but like that's what's available to me right now. And I know for a fact that this will at least make people happy in the short term. And hopefully in the long term, I can make something special out of this.
I think that's a good way to segue into one of the big reasons why McNamara didn't get hired. It was, I mean, why McNamara got hired and why other coaches didn't get hired. We talked about it at length. The resources available for Syracuse. And the man in charge of generating the resources for Syracuse, as Andy mentioned, is Brian Blair. And he gave a pretty good first impression during his introductory press conference and introduction to the Syracuse community this week, which, again, was also this week.
Wow. Yeah.
A lot happened this week, man.
Oh, boy.
I was fortunate enough to be there covering for us as our site news magician to, see the introduction and to participate in the press conference afterwards that he held. And you could feel just a good energy in the room. A lot of people, it was held at Myron Victory Court. If you've ever been to Myron Victory Court, it was held in like the entry vestibule before it got into like the actual main hospitality area or whatever you want to call it.
Yep.
But that place was absolutely packed with, all the Syracuse officials, family, friends, whatnot. And again, you could feel a good excitement to the room. You could feel you felt there was something good coming for Syracuse. And just the impression that Blair gave off gives me a good confidence that he was the right hire for the job. And I think maybe if you didn't like the men's basketball hire, it's just that he hasn't had the time to develop Syracuse into the way that he wants to in order to make the hire that he wanted.
I think Blair showed one thing that is really important right now in that introductory press conference, which is that the time for Syracuse to be a quiet participant is over, and Syracuse needs to be far more proactive and loud about the work that it is doing. Blair said he viewed Syracuse as a top 10 athletic department in the country, which I don't necessarily agree with, but the fact that he feels that way is promising. And he seems to be very willing to make sure that others agree with him on his assertion and will do what is necessary to build that perception up. And I do think that as we talk about, money, and we talk about NIL, and we talk about all these things, it becomes really apparent that Syracuse is probably one of the toughest jobs in D1 sports, simply because there is a football program that has the expectation of going to the postseason every season, and is on the outside looking in of the already kind of established divide between the haves and the have-nots. So you need to spend money in order to get Syracuse to where it is. And you're already on a sweetheart deal with a young up-and-coming coach. And on basketball, your expectations are even higher than football. And in a basketball world where schools that are choosing to either not play football at a D1 level or deprioritize football spend because they see the writing on the wall and therefore are pouring it into basketball, Syracuse is not in a position where it can just simply take what it has left over from football and expect to be competitive in basketball. And that is a unique situation that a few Big Ten teams have, a few ACC teams have, and not very many others can relate to. And so I'm feeling optimistic, but I am realistic that this is an incredibly difficult job in the era of NIL.
Well, he said the right things. I think that's the important thing as well. And you got to remember, for Blair, he is a fundraising guy and an NIL guy. I mean, that's what he was, touted to be. And he said, the right things to, prove that. He showed that, as Andy, alluded to, he wants to be aggressive in the fundraising department, in the NIL department, in order to generate the resources that Syracuse needs in order to become that top 10 program that people here at least want to view Syracuse as. Now, obviously, nationally, there's a lot of work that needs to be done in order for Syracuse to do that. But you immediately know that, like, what we've known right now for Syracuse is that resource generation and just resource availability is Syracuse's biggest limiting factor right now in hanging with the big players in college athletics, whether it be on football, basketball, lacrosse, Olympic sports, you name it. Resource generation is just something that Syracuse hasn't had the luxury, over the past few years. And Blair is definitely the right person to do that job. And I think it's, one of the reasons why that it's it might not look like it right now immediately, because some fans are not would have liked to have seen different hires for men's basketball, but at the same point, he feels like the right man to get Syracuse back to where fans want it to be talked about in a national sense.
Yeah, that's going to be, I think, everything he has said and everything you reported on him saying, and like his presence and the way he presented himself and everything that I've seen, seems initially to pass the laugh test as like he's in the right spot and we grabbed the right guy. He has a damn huge uphill battle on this, though. And that's going to be the thing, is the basketball program being down for as long as it has is a rough spot to walk into. I mean, yeah, the expectations are going to be there, but also, like, there's this weird kind of, I don't know. I know a lot of folks that have just not stopped caring, but like stopped following closely the program that they used to extremely closely. So it's going to be building back a lot of that past goodwill that is kind of gone out the door in recent years.
I mean, what you've seen from football is a good indication of what Syracuse needs to do, and it's one of the big reasons why also the McNamara hire makes sense. It's because, like I said, is that You need something in that initial spark plug to get those fans who have fallen out of favor with Syracuse and get them back interested into the program. Now, like Steve mentioned, in order to keep them around the program, you've got to win. And you saw that also at football, is that, there was a great initial surge. Winning definitely helped. And then last year happened, and now you're seeing a little bit of a decrease in the following of Syracuse football. But the winning still prevailed for Syracuse football, which means that, yes, the losing season didn't help matters, but at the same time, the drop off in following of the program hasn't been as drastic as multiple losing seasons, which is what we've seen from Syracuse basketball. And so that important is that you've already got an initial spark plug. You saw that also at Fran Brown. Fran Brown was an initial spark plug with his introductory press conferences, with the recruiting splashes he made very, very early on in his first 2 weeks of being head coach. And then obviously, he backed it up. Now both Blair and McNamara have to start backing it up.
Yeah, and I think that the interesting thing that I am going to want to see moving forward from this relationship, not just McNamara kissing babies, shaking hands out in the Syracuse public, trying to drum up NIL funds. What I want to see is a bit of that innovation that Blair showed at his previous stops, and specifically at Toledo, and see some of that brought to Syracuse to reinvigorate this fan base. Because Steve, you're 100% right. Like, the apathy around this program over the last 5 years has killed a lot of goodwill, because football, even if not good, Fran Brown is entertaining, and Fran Brown is somebody that you want to root for. Autry, as Alex Klein and as others in op-eds on Syracuse.com have talked about, that was just not his style, and that was a choice that Autry made. And the result of this has been a fan base that, at least right now, feels very upset that the team is bad, but doesn't really know what to do about it. And I think that revitalizing this program after the coaching search that apparently took place and led to Syracuse not getting its first choice, but ending up with an icon, with somebody who is a record holder at Syracuse, who was an assistant for many, many years here, allows you to potentially kickstart a lot of things. But I don't necessarily need to see a $200 a plate down in New York City fundraising event to hear Gerry talk for 5 minutes. I'm sure that will happen, but like, I want to see something different, and I want to see something more.
Yeah. It's going to be an odd take on it. And I guess you brought up something a bit ago about Fran, whether he's good or not, he's entertaining. I want to say, and we saw the highs and the lows from Brown over the last 2 years. What Brown's reaction was after those lows was to actually, clean house from some on the field stuff and coaching staff and look to a veteran presence. And he brought in a coaching staff now that, it's a very different reflection on where he is and who he was looking at than what we saw in his initial coaching staff. What are we going to see out of Gerry's initial coaching staff? And I think that, for me, may be more important than almost anything when it comes to this hire. Because if we just end up with the Syracuse Good Old Boys Club, I worry about what we're doing and where we're going. But if, Gerry brings in a couple of guys and then a couple of, veteran anchors, then maybe we look at things differently. I don't know. Thoughts on any of that?
I think that's very, very important, is that, and you saw it with this year as well. I think, a hidden factor this year, and just in general, was that Autry didn't have the right staff around him. I mean, I think a few people have pointed that out. Is that, and in general as well, is that Autry, when he initially began, retained much of the Mayheim staff and didn't have maybe someone else that could help him, provide a secondary look. There wasn't, there wasn't another voice that could really determine, what needed to be done differently, or maybe something that could have been seen in a different light in order to get the best out of his players. And as Steve mentioned, I think you saw a lot of that with the coaching changes that that Fran made. Is that there was he had a lot of knowns that he wanted to bring in, but now when you look at the changes that Fran made in his coaching staff, there's a lot of NFL experience that he brings in, and a lot of pro experience, and just guys in general who've got impressive resumes behind them joining the staff. So you see the shift in philosophy there, and you'd like to see Gerry maybe head that way, but I think it's more likely maybe to his detriment. Steve and I think that he'll go with a bit more comfort in at least his first rounds of coaching decisions that he makes.
Yeah, and I think when you look at, I know Donna Ditota has done a tremendous job of covering Siena for Syracuse.com, talking to a lot of names on that coaching staff that have Central New York ties, Upstate New York ties, and specifically Syracuse ties. There's a lot of unprovenness on that coaching staff, but again, that's what you kind of get when you're at the mid-major level. And one of the things that Autry struggled with was building a support staff that filled out the things that he didn't do well, and it impacted the team. And obviously that is the challenge that Gerry will have here, where in his time at Syracuse, he did famously work with the guards and worked with Joe Girard. But Gerry was also the big man's coach for a period of time there. And that was something that I think didn't get a ton of play, but was really interesting dynamic of the Syracuse staff. And I think it will be interesting to see what Gerry does in terms of where he chooses to double click as the head coach at Syracuse and where he chooses to kind of lean back and let assistants do some of the work. One of the other things that we don't know yet that I think will be really important here, another piece of news that kind of happened, although not quite this week, but Christian and I didn't talk about it too much, was that in the firing of Autry, there was a full clean house, including general manager Alex Klein. And there is no longer a general manager working at Syracuse basketball. With this hire, there was no reporting by Thamel if McNamara was going to bring in his own GM, if he was going to look for his own GM, a la what Fran Brown did in bringing with him a Georgia assistant who ended up being elevated to Syracuse's first general manager, or if Syracuse, like what they did with Autry, is going to let McNamara kind of have first crack at building the roster himself and then instilling a GM if they feel like he needs more support. So that to me is another big question here that I am interested to see how it plays out, because I don't think that you can necessarily run an effective basketball program without a general manager these days. But again, Blair is coming from a less is more mentality, and maybe Blair plans on having some sort of role that handles a lot of the NIL things across Syracuse sports holistically, rather than having each team carry its own general manager. So another thing that I'm kind of eagerly awaiting on over the next couple of weeks, while we assume have a Gerry McNamara introductory press conference this week, and assume have more news coming out later this week about what exactly this means for the program moving forward.
Well, should we get to the happier news on the Syracuse front?
I mean, Syracuse has a basketball coach. That is good news. It's just definitely a complicated decision for sure. Let's talk about something that's less complicated.
The Syracuse team.
Yeah,
the Syracuse team that definitely has a basketball coach as well in the women's basketball program, and Felicia Lekachek and the women defeat Iowa State in the first round of the NCAA tournament. Syracuse as a 9, Iowa State as an 8. led by 23 points from Uche Izoje, the ACC Rookie of the Year, and someone that we're very much hoping Don Staley is not watching. That was a good performance from Syracuse. Got out to a big lead, especially in the second quarter, thanks to some hot shooting from Olivia Schmidt. Had hit 5 of 6 threes for 15 points. And then Uzoje, Felia, and Burrows, the big three, kind of took the rest of the way for Syracuse. And did a good job to limit players on Iowa State not named Audie Crooks.
And Izoje got some extremely high praise today. Or was it yesterday?
It was
from one Gino Oriema. Ever heard of him?
Yeah, it was indeed today. Gino in his press conferences thereafter UConn's practice saying that Izoje's the best player that UConn has seen this year,
which is about as high praise as you can get in women's college basketball, I'd say.
Yeah.
I thought that, Syracuse has continued to do what it does under FLJ, which is find really interesting young stars and give them an opportunity to shine. What I hope, obviously happens next is that as we're talking about NIL across Syracuse, that the same thing that we just mentioned with Gerry happens with FLJ and the women's program, where they can get creative with their NIL funding and find a way to keep this roster together. Because I think obviously the reason that you play the game is because there's obvious anything can happen, but this might be one of the best UConn teams ever. And I do not think that Syracuse is in a position to necessarily defeat them. What it is an opportunity for is for all these women to show out and compete against one of the best teams ever and potentially get on the radar of other schools that are looking to challenge UConn next season with their championship aspirations. We saw this already happen once with South Carolina and Don Staley. Pick one of Syracuse's best players, take them down to Columbia and win a national championship. So I think that is an off-season problem. That is a champagne problem to have. But regardless, it is part of the reason why this conversation around Syracuse is so interesting, because for another time this season, a Syracuse player went into a game with a team that was more highly talked about, more highly, quote unquote, respected, had a bigger star, and just played the better game. And so I applaud Syracuse for what they continue to do this year, which is defy some expectations. And based off of the social media activity and all the videos that come out of that locker room, like, this team really seems to have really good vibes. And that was something that was sorely lacking this season across most of the sports in the fall and in the spring.
It's going to be tough against UConn, but I mean, we've seen crazier things before. So we'll see what happens next for the Orange. But last I checked, UConn was a 33.5 point favorite or something like that. So it's Syracuse has a major hill.
Insignificant.
Yes.
I mean, how many points was Sienna Dogs to Duke? And yes, I know that's apples and kumquats, but as far as the talent differentials, but yeah.
And UConn didn't cover in their first game, so
there you go.
Was the line 55.5 against UTSA in the first game for UConn? Yes, but you didn't
also,
cover.
Andy, you mentioned UConn being one of the best teams ever, and I feel like you could just reiterate that every year for the past 30 years, and it would still be the same statement.
Yeah, I think that's true. But also, this one happens to have two players who, if you could have a NBA style WNBA draft, would probably go 1 and 2. Which again, with UConn, is probably not that uncommon. But this year, especially, that Sarah Strong and AZ Fudd are just, that is a hell of a combo that Syracuse is going to have to defend in some way, and you will not stop them. You will only limit the damage. So. This is, if you haven't watched them at a play at any point this season, do it, because they are phenomenal basketball players. But man, if you are really diehard Syracuse fan and really don't like UConn beating Syracuse, this is going to be a tough one.
It's 6 p.m. on main ESPN tomorrow, Monday, or at least tomorrow when we're recording. Monday, 6 p.m. on main ESPN. So if you listen in time, head on over to ESPN, support the ladies, and who knows? Who knows what can happen? I mean, it's the NCAA tournament. Anything can really happen.
Yeah, if you're listening to this on your drive to work, it's going to be tonight. If you're listening to it on your drive home from work, get the hell home faster.
You know what else happened today? Syracuse men's lacrosse enjoying some sweet dome cooking.
For the first time in a good couple of weeks.
Yes, as we mentioned, Syracuse was on a 6-game road trip. Syracuse has not been home since its game against Maryland. Yes, I know it's been that long. And
it's a totally normal thing to do. Go on a 6-game road skid in the middle of the season. It's fine.
Orange go 4-2 over that 6-game road trip. They lose to Harvard and Princeton to start out, but win the remaining 4 games, taking down Penn in overtime, Johns Hopkins, Air Force, and Denver. And then they enjoy the home cookings of the Dome, scoring 7 unanswered in the second quarter and eventually win 18-12 over Georgetown in the Dome in a pretty physical game as it turned out at the end. So, I mean, the Syracuse still not beating the can't win outdoors in February allegations, but I mean, you see why in that performance why the Dome is such a revered place in lacrosse, and that should definitely showed it there.
Absolutely. And also, it's 8:52 p.m. and Georgetown still sucks.
Georgetown definitely still sucks.
So the on deck for them is number 6 Duke. I don't know what Duke played this weekend.
Yeah, Duke played at the same time at Syracuse.
Yep.
They hosted Denver, and as we know, Syracuse already played Denver. And Duke eked out an 8-7 victory over Denver, also using a 7-goal second period as well.
And that's a Denver team we eked out a win 13-12 against.
Exactly, yeah.
Yep. So, well, going to be fun. And that's Saturday at 2 p.m. at the Dome. So,
Indeed. Got to shout out the ladies as well, who ever since a game against Louisville have given up no more than 6 goals in a game for 5 straight games. This is a historic women's lacrosse defense, and again doing it against Virginia on the road, winning 6-5, only giving up 1 goal in the second half, which is nuts. You don't see this type of defense in women's lacrosse, and this is historic.
Yeah, and it's kind of strange the way the schedule lines up for them.
Yeah,
because I don't think they really have another. Like they have a couple. They've got Pitt, who's ranked, and then a bunch of the Duke, Notre Dame, BC in the mid-teens coming up. But other than that, their whole schedule is pretty front-loaded on the big games.
Yeah, I mean, their only losses are to the top 3 teams in the country currently in North Carolina, Stanford, and Maryland. They have the signature win. They have 2 signature wins that help them: the win over Northwestern and the win over Yale. If you remember, Syracuse lost to Yale twice last year. Yep. One of them knocking them out in the NCAA tournament, and Yale was number 7 heading into that game. Cuse was ranked 9th. So, and also obviously the Northwestern win at Northwestern, which helps things massively for Syracuse. And don't forget, this is a BC team that has only lost to North Carolina last year. This is a BC team not as good.
Yeah, it's gonna be interesting to see how this one finishes out for both sides of the SU lacrosse spectrum.
Indeed, it will be. And the men basically only have ACC games in Colgate left. The women do have a couple non-conference games against Albany and Cornell before taking on, like Steve said, Pitt, Duke, Notre Dame, and Boston College, all who are ranked but outside of the top 10. So you should see Syracuse doing some well there. We've got we've got a good amount of time left in the pod, and that means we should talk about what all three of us are really here to talk about, and it's spring football.
The good stuff.
Yep. Well, I'm in there for the first two practices of spring football, so I'll turn it over to these guys to ask me any and all questions they want me to answer.
I mean, the first question that we must ask, what's going on with the big boys, and who are the big boys protecting?
Well, the big boys, I think I haven't spent too much time looking at the big boys. We're talking about Steve's favorite topic, the offensive line. Obviously, also working with a new coach in Juan Castillo, who certainly has a good amount of energy to him, just in the few things that I have looked at, because I've been focusing mainly on who the big boys are protecting, and that's obviously the quarterbacks. Steve Angeli is practicing. He is very limited, though. He really only does a couple of drills, and hasn't really pushed himself too much. Jeff Nixon did say that he expects Steve to be 100% by June, so that is an encouraging timeline. Seemingly, as long as he stays to his timeline of that, he should be full ready to go by the time training camp starts in August.
I think that, I mean, inherently, that's the biggest question for anything based on what we saw last year. I mean, beyond that, was there anybody that really jumped at you from what you saw?
It's really funny how Calvin Russell looks not entirely too big on a basketball court, but looks massive on a football field.
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie. DBs are usually a little bit shorter than the rest of the basketball team.
Exactly. So, I mean, his size definitely stands out to me on the football field, and it feels like, you know, as he gets more and more back into football. I mean, he talked to the media as well after practice, and said like he's only really been with the team for a week, because he's been fully with the men's basketball program, and so he really hasn't been really into football. One of the other things that you may have noticed from various practice footage from myself or around social media is that a number of players, including Russell, are wearing triple digit numbers. It's all part of Fran's thing that he's instituting into this spring practice of players earning their number. So you can look at the Cuse.com roster page that is fully updated with who's available for spring practice, and the players who don't have numbers listed for them are wearing triple digits in practice because they haven't quote unquote earned their number yet.
There you go. Speaking of numbers, Christian, earlier you sent me the fact that the spring roster is up. They haven't updated weights.
Oh,
they're all exactly the same as the fall. So
okay, I know that's Steve's most interesting part of the of any roster review is comparing heights and weights to some people. It sounds like the strength and conditioning program has done its job as usual. Players are up weights, and some players have have gone up in weights. Jeff Nixon said Davian Kerr, the other Kerr brother, who has switched over to running back from DB, is up 15 pounds, which is for first of all for a DB / running back, that's pretty good, and in off season, and I expect most players to have some sort of similar jump or cut in whatever way that is necessary for them.
I mean, it sounds in general like the football program, there's optimism, which we appreciate, but again, Angeli being not going to be ready by the time the spring game rolls around is definitely going to continue to linger into the spring, or into the fall, I should say, because at the end of the day, we saw what he did last year when healthy, and a lot of my questions around this team will get answered when we see our number one quarterback throwing to receivers, and how our defensive backs kind of handle that. Because if you guys were around here a couple of years ago, really we started getting some inclination that first season under Fran was going to be special when Christian and others were able to watch Kyle McCord run the one-on-one offensive drills with wide receivers, run the 11 versus 11 scrimmages with, starters on starters. That was when we really got our first inkling of, oh, okay, this is actually going to work. So it's going to be difficult for us to really take any kind of takeaways here until we have a better idea of what Angeli is working with in terms of this wide receiver group.
I think it'll be interesting as well, like how the depth chart in general shakes out. They've done an interesting thing of they've done an interesting thing of separating the practices a bit. Just because if you look at the roster with the removal of roster limits, this roster is huge.
Yeah.
There were so many people on this roster, and so you've got a hierarchy of guys, but not necessarily a good idea of a depth chart with guys right now. So there's no real indication of like who's being favored right now. A lot of the returners, of course, are up there. A couple of the transfers, are making some waves. The big wide receiver transfer I can think of is that is getting a bit more attention than maybe some of the other wideout additions is Cole Weaver from Miami of Ohio. He's definitely got the experience to back it up as well. And obviously, I think the running back transfers also in Juwan Johnson and Ahmad Miller are fighting it out, especially to take over that running back role that was vacated by Yassine Willis.
Honestly, kind of forgot about the whole running back thing, but yeah, totally remembered now that Yassine is now playing for the Kansas Jayhawks, and it's going to be interesting to see what happens with the offense in general, if only because we know that the end of last year things kind of fell apart without a competent QB. I can't believe it's taken us this long to kind of get there, Christian, but like also backup quarterbacks. Anything of note, or hey, they all kind of look decent slinging the ball right now?
There's definitely a lot to work on in terms of just in general from the backup QBs. All of them feel like they're works in progress. Amari's Odom's size is very, very big as well for a quarterback. He's got great size. So I think he could be a factor in multiple ways, which is physicality. Malachi Nelson has some really, really good mobility. And it feels like he can be very, very shifty if needed as not just a passer, but as a runner as well. And then Danny Lauder from Georgetown has some really, really good zip on his ball. It comes out of his hand fast. So I think all these quarterbacks have their strengths and weaknesses, and we're starting to see them continue to flood through as the practices go on.
I didn't realize Lott was 6'4" as well.
Yeah, he's got good size also. I think all the quarterbacks have some really good size. The only one who's really like undersized is Rich Beeline, which is the reason why I think he's a bit lower in the depth chart. But they really like Lott as well. Yeah, and you saw that if you saw the social media clip of him throwing to Russell. He was seen as an early leader of the incoming freshman class for this orange group that came in this year. And so I think something that Fran had made clear is that he didn't build in paraphrasing his words, he didn't build the quarterback room correctly last year. And so he was definitely, when he was going to the portal, he was definitely hunting quarterback experience. And you see that with the three transfers in Odom, Nelson, and Lauder. All of them have starting quarterback experience and significant playing experience at the quarterback level. So if Steve is either not ready to go or an injury does happen again to Steve, you feel more confident about the options behind him because of the experience that all three of those guys have playing just college football in general coming back here. And
Nelson has it everywhere.
Slightly.
He had a couple of stops over the last couple of years.
Like I got a chance to talk to Nelson. I didn't give my customary are you getting used to the Syracuse weather question to Nelson because he's spent a season at Boise State, which means he has experienced Syracuse weather.
Yep, he gets it. USC and UTEP a little bit less.
Only slightly.
Well, I think that means that we have reached the end of this podcast, and we did indeed end up winning 10 games. But I think that might just because we do happen to have a Gerry McNamara at our head coach right now. So thank you to everybody who tuned into this edition of the Disloyal Idiots. We appreciate your support. Make sure that you like and subscribe to help us trick the AI into expanding the Ottoman Empire. Thank you again to our sister site, News Magician. Pay attention to them this week. There's going to be a lot of content coming out of there in what is expected to be an incredibly busy week around campus, around all of our programs. Thank you again to everybody who's watching this on YouTube. We are going to be uploading these episodes every week over there. Again, thank you for looking at our lovely mugs as we do this, and we appreciate the support across all the platforms. Finally, as always, want to say thank you to everybody who's been here all off season. No, it's been a weird one. It's been a weird season. Maybe not always the best, but now we head into what I think is going to be hope. Eventually, we'll feel like hope. We'll see what happens when we actually get there. So as always, to you, to everybody else, and especially to Gerry fucking McNamara, go Orange.
Go Orange.
Orange.